The orange glow painted the Montana sky like a demon's canvas, and Beatrice Lawson stood frozen in her nightdress, watching everything her parents had built turn to ash and ember. The fire had started in the barn, or so she thought, but it spread so fast across the dry August grass that within 20 minutes the house, the shed, the chicken coop, and every fence post that marked her family's claim were consumed by flames that roared like a living beast. She had barely escaped with her life, clutching nothing but the worn quilt her mother had sewn the year before she died. And now she stood in the middle of the dirt road that led into Utica, Montana, watching the only home she had ever known collapse into itself with a shower of sparks that danced up into the darkness like malevolent fireflies. It was 1883, and Beatrice was 22 years old, unmarried and now utterly alone in the world. Her father had passed just 3 months prior from pneumonia, leaving her to manage the homestead by herself. She had been doing well enough, tending the small herd of cattle, maintaining the vegetable garden, trading eggs and milk with the general store in town. But now there was nothing left. The cattle had scattered into the hills, probably lost forever. The chickens were dead. Everything she owned had been inside that house, and now it was all gone. The heat was still so intense that she could not get close enough to see if anything could be salvaged. She simply stood there, her bare feet dusty on the road, her long dark hair tangled around her shoulders, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. The night air was warm, typical for late summer in Montana, but she shivered anyway, shock settling into her bones like ice despite the inferno before her. She did not know how long she stood there. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The fire eventually began to die down as it ran out of fuel, leaving only smoldering ruins and the acrid smell of destruction. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon when she heard the sound of hoofbeats on the road behind her. Beatrice turned, her body stiff and aching to see a rider approaching. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, she could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback, and behind the horse, he was pulling a wagon. As he drew closer, she could see that the wagon was loaded with lumber, the boards stacked neatly and secured with rope. The man himself was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown hat and a dark shirt. His horse was a sturdy gray mare that looked like she had traveled many miles. He reined in when he saw her standing there, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then his gaze shifted to the smoking ruins behind her, and his expression changed from curiosity to concern. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and rough but not unkind, "what happened here?" Beatrice tried to speak, but found her voice would not come. Her throat was raw from smoke and crying, and all she could do was gesture helplessly at the destruction behind her. The man dismounted in one smooth motion and walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell to his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes were a striking blue-gray like storm clouds, and they held genuine worry as they studied her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, finally finding her voice. "No, I got out, but everything else is gone." He looked back at the ruins again, then at her nightdress and bare feet. "You got family in town, someone who can take you in." "No," Beatrice whispered. "There is no one. My parents are both dead. I was alone here." The man was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as if he were thinking through a problem. Then he pulled off his coat and held it out to her. "You should put this on, and you need boots. You cannot stand out here like this." Beatrice took the coat automatically and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body and smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant. "Thank you," she managed to say. "My name is Garrett Davis," the man said. "I am a carpenter by trade. I was on my way to a job in Utica, building a new storefront for the hardware merchant, but it seems like you might need this lumber more than he does right now." Beatrice stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Garrett gestured at the wagon behind him. "I mean I can help you rebuild. It will not be the same as what you lost, but I can get you a roof over your head and 4 walls to keep out the weather. That is, if you want the help." She felt her eyes fill with tears again, but this time they were not just from grief. "I cannot pay you. I have nothing. Everything burned." "I did not ask for payment," Garrett said simply. "I asked if you wanted the help." Beatrice looked at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, offering kindness when she had expected nothing but more loss and hardship. She did not know what to make of him. In her experience, men did not do things for free, especially not for women they did not know. There was always a price, always an expectation, but something in his eyes, in the straightforward way he spoke, made her want to believe him. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I want the help, thank you." Garrett nodded as if that settled the matter. "Good. First thing, we need to get you into town and get you some proper clothes and boots. Then we can come back and see what can be salvaged from the ruins once they cool down. After that, we will start building." He helped her up into the wagon seat, and she sat there wrapped in his coat while he tied his horse to the back and then climbed up beside her. The ride into Utica took about 30 minutes, and during that time, Beatrice found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. He had a strong profile, and his hands on the reins were calloused and scarred from years of hard work. He did not try to make conversation, which she appreciated. She was not sure she could have managed small talk in her current state. Utica was a small town, just a few streets of wooden buildings clustered around a main road. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith, and a handful of other establishments. As they pulled up in front of the general store, the sun was just starting to rise properly, painting the buildings in shades of gold and pink. The store was not open yet, but Garrett knocked on the door until a sleepy-looking man in his 50s appeared, grumbling about the early hour. His complaints died in his throat when he saw Beatrice, and his expression shifted to alarm. "Miss Lawson, what on earth happened to you?" "There was a fire, Mr. Henderson," Beatrice said quietly. "The homestead is gone. Everything burned." Mr. Henderson's face went pale. "Good Lord. Are you all right? Come in, come in." "Martha," he called back into the living quarters above the store. "Martha, get down here. Miss Lawson needs help." Within minutes, Beatrice was hustled upstairs by Mrs. Henderson, a plump, kind-faced woman who clucked over her like a worried hen. She was given a basin of water to wash with, and Mrs. Henderson found her a dress that had belonged to their daughter before she married and moved to Helena. It was a simple gray cotton dress with a white collar, practical and modest. Mrs. Henderson also provided undergarments, stockings, and a sturdy pair of boots that were only slightly too large. "You can stuff some cloth in the toes," Mrs. Henderson said. "They will do until we can get you properly fitted." When Beatrice came back downstairs, clean and dressed, she found Garrett and Mr. Henderson deep in conversation. They broke off when they saw her, and Garrett's eyes lingered on her face for a moment before he looked away. "Mr. Henderson has kindly agreed to extend you credit for supplies," Garrett said. "Whatever you need to get started again, you can pay him back once you are on your feet." "That is very generous," Beatrice said, looking at the store owner with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." "It is the least we can do," Mr. Henderson said gruffly. "Your father was a good man, and you have always been a good neighbor. We take care of our own in Utica." They loaded additional supplies into the wagon. Nails, a hammer and saw for Beatrice to help with, blankets, a cooking pot, some basic foodstuffs, and a canvas tarp that could serve as temporary shelter. By the time they headed back out to the homestead, the sun was fully up, and the day was already growing warm. When they arrived back at the property, the ruins had cooled enough to approach. Garrett and Beatrice picked through the ashes carefully, looking for anything that might have survived. They found very little. A cast iron skillet that was blackened but still usable, a few metal tools from the barn that had warped in the heat but might be salvageable, and miraculously, a small metal box that had been in her father's desk. Inside the box were some papers, singed around the edges but readable, including the deed to the land and her parents' marriage certificate. There was also a small amount of money, about $40 in bills and coins, that had somehow survived. "This is more than I hoped for," Beatrice said, clutching the box to her chest. "At least I still have proof that this land is mine." Garrett was surveying the property with a practiced eye. "We will need to clear away the debris before we can start building. That will take at least a day, maybe two. But the foundation stones from the old house are still good. We can use those as a base for the new structure." "You really mean to do this?" Beatrice said, watching him. "You are really going to help me rebuild?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I said I would. I do not make promises I cannot keep." Something in the way he said it made her believe him completely. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips for the first time since the fire. "Then I will help too. Tell me what needs to be done." They spent the rest of that day clearing debris. It was hot, dirty, exhausting work. Garrett had brought 2 shovels and they worked side by side, hauling away charred wood and twisted metal, sorting what could be salvaged from what needed to be discarded. Beatrice's hands, unused to this kind of heavy labor, quickly developed blisters, but she did not complain. This was her land, her home, and she would do whatever it took to rebuild it. As they worked, they talked. Garrett told her about himself in short, spare sentences. He had grown up in Texas, learned carpentry from his father, and had been traveling around the West for the past 5 years, taking jobs wherever he could find them. He had no family left, no ties to any particular place. He went where the work was and moved on when the job was done. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Beatrice asked, pausing to wipe sweat from her forehead. Traveling all the time, never settling down, Garrett was quiet for a moment, leaning on his shovel. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I have not found a reason to stop yet." She wanted to ask what kind of reason he was looking for, but something held her back. Instead, she told him about herself, about growing up on this homestead, about her mother dying when she was 16, about her father's long illness and how hard she had tried to keep everything running after he passed. She found herself talking more than she had in months, the words spilling out of her as if the fire had burned away whatever walls she had built around herself. By the time the sun began to set, they had cleared most of the debris from the main house site. Garrett set up the canvas tarp between 2 surviving fence posts, creating a makeshift shelter. He built a small fire ring with stones and started a fire, and Beatrice used the salvaged skillet to cook a simple meal of beans and bacon from their supplies. They ate in companionable silence, sitting on opposite sides of the small fire. The stars were beginning to come out overhead, brilliant and uncountable in the vast Montana sky. It was strange, Beatrice thought, to be sitting here with this man she had only met that morning, yet somehow it did not feel strange at all. It felt natural, comfortable, as if they had known each other much longer. "You should sleep," Garrett said after they had cleaned up from the meal. "You have been through a terrible ordeal, and tomorrow will be another hard day." "Where will you sleep?" Beatrice asked. He gestured to his bedroll, which he had laid out on the other side of the fire. "Right here. I will keep the fire going and make sure nothing disturbs you." She wanted to protest, to say that he should have better shelter than just a bedroll under the stars, but she was suddenly so exhausted that she could barely keep her eyes open. She crawled under the canvas tarp, wrapped herself in the blankets they had brought from town, and fell asleep almost immediately. She woke once during the night, disoriented and frightened, the memory of flames filling her mind. But then she heard the soft crackle of the fire and saw Garrett's silhouette sitting watch, and she felt safe enough to close her eyes and drift back to sleep. The next day, they continued clearing and began laying out the dimensions of the new house. Garrett explained that they would build something simple but solid. One large room that could serve as both living space and bedroom, with a separate small kitchen area and a loft for storage. It would not be as grand as the house she had lost, but it would be hers, and it would be home. "We can always add on later," Garrett said, "once you have more resources, but this will give you a good start." They worked from dawn until dusk, breaking only for brief meals. Beatrice was determined to pull her weight, and though her muscles ached and her blistered hands were wrapped in cloth, she kept pace with Garrett. She found herself watching him as they worked, admiring the easy competence with which he handled tools and materials, the way his muscles moved under his shirt as he lifted heavy beams, the focused expression on his face when he was measuring and cutting wood. On the third day, they began actually constructing the frame of the house. Garrett showed Beatrice how to hold boards steady while he nailed them together, how to check that corners were square, how to read his measuring marks. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes, always taking time to explain the why behind what they were doing. "You are a good student," he said at one point, flashing her a rare smile that made her heart do an unexpected flip in her chest. "You are a good teacher," she replied, and was rewarded with another smile. By the end of the first week, the basic frame was up, and Beatrice could begin to see the shape of what would be her new home. She stood back one evening, looking at it with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "I cannot believe we have done this much already," she said. Garrett came to stand beside her, his own gaze on the structure. "You have worked hard. You should be proud." "We have worked hard," she corrected him. "I could never have done this without you, Garrett. I do not know how I can ever repay you." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Beatrice, I did not do this for repayment. I did it because you needed help and I was able to give it. That is enough." She met his eyes, those striking blue-gray eyes that seemed to see right through her, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was not just gratitude she felt toward this man, though she certainly felt that. It was something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. She had never felt anything quite like it before, and it frightened her even as it thrilled her. "Still," she said softly, "thank you for everything." He held her gaze for a moment longer, and she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, some emotion that matched her own. But then he looked away, clearing his throat. "We should eat," he said. "Tomorrow we start on the roof." As they settled into the routine of rebuilding, Beatrice found herself learning more about Garrett in the small moments between work. She learned that he liked his coffee strong and black, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes and made her laugh, that he was deeply uncomfortable with praise, but would light up like a boy when she complimented his craftsmanship. She learned that he was unfailingly kind to animals, taking time to pet and speak softly to his horse even when he was exhausted from a long day's work. She learned that he sometimes woke in the night from bad dreams, though he never spoke of what haunted him. In turn, she found herself sharing things with him that she had never told anyone else. She told him about her fear that she would never be strong enough to make it on her own, about the loneliness that had plagued her after her father died, about her dreams of someday having a family of her own, but never meeting anyone in Utica who made her want to risk her heart. "There just are not many options in a town this small," she said one evening as they sat by the fire after another long day of work. "And the few men who have shown interest were either twice my age or drunks or both." Garrett was whittling a piece of wood, shaping it into what looked like it might become a door handle. "You deserve better than that," he said quietly. "Do I?" she asked, surprised by the certainty in his voice. He looked up at her, his knife stilling. "Yes, you are strong, hard-working kind. Any man would be lucky to have you." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks and she looked away, flustered. "That is kind of you to say." "It is not kindness," Garrett said. "It is the truth." She did not know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject, asking him about his next job after this one was done. But his words stayed with her, warming her from the inside even as the night air grew cool. By the end of the second week, the roof was complete, and they were working on the interior walls and floor. The structure was taking on the feel of a real house now, and Beatrice could imagine what it would be like to live there. She caught herself sometimes thinking of it not as her house but as their house, then had to remind herself that Garrett was only here temporarily, that once the building was done, he would move on to his next job, his next town. The thought of him leaving made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. One afternoon, she was working inside the partially completed house while Garrett was outside cutting more lumber. She heard voices and looked out to see 3 men on horseback approaching. She did not recognize them, and something about the way they sat their horses, the hard look on their faces, made her uneasy. Garrett had seen them too and had set down his saw, straightening up to face them. Beatrice quickly climbed down from the ladder she had been on and went outside to stand beside him. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Garrett asked, his voice neutral but wary. The man in the center, who seemed to be the leader, was a heavy-set man with a thick beard and small, mean eyes. "This is the Lawson place, is it not?" he asked. "It is," Beatrice said, stepping forward. "I am Beatrice Lawson. This is my land." The man looked her over in a way that made her skin crawl. "Name is Cole Hendricks. I own the ranch to the east of here. Your father and I had some disputes about the property line between our lands. Now that he is gone, I figured it was time to settle the matter." "There is nothing to settle," Beatrice said firmly. "The property lines are clearly marked in the deed. This land is mine." Hendricks's expression hardened. "That is not how I see it. I think there has been some confusion about where your land ends and mine begins. I am willing to buy this parcel from you, seeing as how your house burned down and all, save you the trouble of rebuilding." "The house is already being rebuilt," Garrett said quietly. "And the lady said the land is not for sale." Hendricks turned his cold eyes on Garrett. "Who are you, stranger? I do not recall seeing you around these parts before." "I am a friend helping Miss Lawson rebuild her home," Garrett said. "And you are on her property without invitation. I suggest you state your business clearly or move along." For a moment, tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. The 2 men with Hendricks shifted in their saddles, their hands moving toward the guns at their hips. Beatrice's heart was pounding, but Garrett stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. "Now see here," Hendricks started, his voice rising. "No, you see here," Beatrice interrupted, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. "This land belonged to my parents, and now it belongs to me. I have the deed that proves it, properly filed with the county. If you have a dispute about property lines, you can take it up with the authorities in Helena. But you will not bully me into selling my home, Mr. Hendricks. Now please leave." Hendricks stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working, Then he spat on the ground and yanked his horse's reins. "We will see about this, Miss Lawson. We will see." He and his men rode off, kicking up dust. Beatrice stood watching them go until they disappeared over the rise, then she let out a shaky breath. "That was well done," Garrett said, his voice warm with approval. "I was terrified," Beatrice admitted. "You did not show it. That took courage." He paused, then added, "But we should be careful. Men like that do not give up easily when they want something. Do you think he will come back? Maybe. Or he might try something else. Either way, we will deal with it when it comes." That night, Garrett insisted on keeping watch even though Beatrice said it was not necessary. She woke several times to see him sitting by the fire, alert and watchful, and each time she felt a surge of gratitude mixed with something deeper and more complicated. The next day, they went into town to purchase more supplies and to speak with the sheriff about Hendrix's visit. Sheriff Morton was a thin, weathered man in his 60s who listened to their story with a grave expression. "Cole Hendrix is a troublemaker," he said bluntly. "He has been trying to expand his ranch for years, and he is not particular about how he does it. But if you have got the deed and it is properly filed, he cannot legally take your land. I will keep an eye on the situation, and I will ride out there with you now to document the property boundaries, just to make sure there is no confusion." Sheriff Morton accompanied them back to the homestead, and spent the afternoon walking the property lines with Beatrice and Garrett, referring to the deed and making notes. He was thorough and professional, and by the end of the day he had confirmed that the boundaries were exactly as stated in the deed. "You have got a strong legal claim, Miss Lawson," he said. "Hendrix does not have a leg to stand on. But you keep an eye out, and if he or his men come around causing trouble, you send for me right away." After the sheriff left, Beatrice and Garrett went back to work on the house. The encounter with Hendrix had shaken Beatrice more than she wanted to admit, but having Garrett there made her feel safer. She found herself very aware of his presence, of the way he seemed to position himself between her and any potential threat, of the protective glances he cast toward the horizon as they worked. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating their simple supper, Beatrice finally voiced the question that had been nagging at her. "Garrett, you said you go where the work is and move on when the job is done. How much longer do you think it will take to finish the house?" He was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "Maybe another week, perhaps two if we add the porch and some interior finishing. Why do you ask?" "I was just wondering," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "You must have other jobs waiting for you." "I do not want to keep you from your work." "The hardware merchant in Utica can wait," Garrett said. "He knew I might be delayed, and there is always more work. That is not something I worry about." "But you will move on eventually," Beatrice said, unable to stop herself. "That is what you do, is it not? You build and then you leave." Garrett looked at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "That is what I have always done, yes. Does it ever bother you?" she asked. "Leaving behind the things you build, the people you meet." He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and rough. It never did before. Beatrice's breath caught. And now, Garrett set down the stick he had been holding and turned to face her fully. "Now I find myself thinking about what it might be like to stay. To have a place I belong, a reason to put down roots." Her heart was beating so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "What changed? You did," he said simply. "Being here with you these past weeks, building something together, talking by the fire at night. It has made me realize what I have been missing all these years on the road." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I do not want you to go," she whispered. "I know I have no right to ask you to stay, but I do not want you to leave, Garrett." He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers gently. "Then I will not go. If you want me here, Beatrice, I will stay." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. In the flickering firelight, his eyes were soft, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I want you here," she said. "Not just as someone helping me rebuild. I want you to stay because I care about you, more than I probably should after such a short time." "There is no time limit on feelings," Garrett said, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "I have cared about you since the first morning I saw you standing in the road with ashes in your hair and tears on your face. I have been trying to tell myself it was just sympathy, just wanting to help someone in need. But it is more than that, Beatrice. You have gotten under my skin in the best possible way." She smiled through her tears. "You have gotten under mine, too." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, looking at each other across the fire. There was so much Beatrice wanted to say, but the words seemed inadequate. Instead, she held onto his hand like a lifeline, marveling at how much her life had changed in such a short time. She had lost everything, and then found something she had not even known she was looking for. Eventually, they banked the fire and settled down to sleep, but now Garrett moved his bedroll closer to the canvas shelter where Beatrice slept, close enough that she could hear his breathing in the darkness. She fell asleep feeling happier and more hopeful than she had in months, maybe years. The next morning they went back to work on the house with renewed energy. Garrett was teaching Beatrice how to hang a door when they heard horses approaching again. They both tensed, but when Beatrice looked out, she saw it was not Hendricks but rather a group of people from town, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, the blacksmith and his wife, the owner of the boarding house, and several others. Mrs. Henderson climbed down from her wagon, beaming. "We heard you were rebuilding, dear, and we thought we would come out and help with a proper barn raising. Well, house raising in this case." "We brought food," said another woman, holding up a basket, "and extra tools and willing hands." Beatrice was overwhelmed. "I do not know what to say. This is so kind of you all." "Nonsense," Mr. Henderson said gruffly. "You are one of us, Miss Lawson. And besides, we all remember how your father helped rebuild the church after that storm 5 years back. We take care of each other here." With so many hands helping, the work progressed rapidly. The men worked on finishing the exterior walls and starting on the porch Garrett had planned, while the women helped with interior details like shelving and whitewashing the walls. Children ran around playing games, their laughter filling the air. Someone produced a fiddle, and music drifted over the work site. It felt like a celebration, and in a way it was. Beatrice moved through the crowd, thanking people, helping where she could, and she noticed how naturally Garrett fit in with the other men, how they quickly accepted him as one of their own. She also noticed the speculative looks some of the women were giving her and Garrett, the knowing smiles when they saw how he looked at her. "He is a good man, that one," Mrs. Henderson said quietly to Beatrice at one point. "And the way he looks at you, dear, like you are the sunrise." Beatrice blushed. "We have only known each other a few weeks." "Sometimes that is all it takes," Mrs. Henderson said with a wink. "My Henry proposed to me after 2 weeks of courting. We have been married 35 years now. By the end of the day, the house was nearly complete. All it needed was some finishing touches and furnishing." The townspeople packed up their tools and headed home as the sun set, calling out well wishes and promises to come back for a proper housewarming once Beatrice was settled in. When they were alone again, Beatrice and Garrett walked through the completed house together. It was simple but well built, with solid walls and a tight roof, windows that would let in plenty of light, and a stone fireplace that Garrett had constructed with careful precision. It smelled of fresh cut pine and whitewash and possibility. "It is perfect," Beatrice said, running her hand along one of the walls. "Better than perfect. It is home." Garrett was watching her with that soft expression she was coming to treasure. "You deserve a real bed and a real roof after sleeping under canvas for weeks. Tomorrow we can go into town and get furniture, kitchen supplies, everything you need." "Tomorrow," Beatrice agreed. "But tonight I just want to enjoy this. Thank you, Garrett, for all of it." He crossed the room to her, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "When I said I would stay, I meant it, but I want you to understand what that means. I am not a rich man. I am just a carpenter, and that is all I will ever be. I do not have land or savings or anything to offer you except my 2 hands and my skills and whatever devotion I can give. If that is not enough, I will understand." Beatrice reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her palm. "Garrett Davis, you rode into my life when I had lost everything and gave me back hope. You worked beside me, believed in me, made me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again. You have given me more than any amount of money or land could. If you are asking what I think you are asking, then yes, the answer is yes." His eyes widened. "I have not asked yet," she smiled. "Then ask." Garrett took both her hands in his, and she saw that his were shaking slightly. "Beatrice Lawson, I know it is fast and maybe it is crazy, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Would you marry me? Would you let me stay here with you, not just as someone who helped rebuild your house, but as your husband, your partner in everything?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Garrett, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she did not care. She wrapped her arms around him and held on just as tightly, feeling like she had finally found the place she was meant to be. When he finally loosened his hold enough to look down at her, she saw that his eyes were suspiciously bright too. "I love you," he said roughly. "I know I should probably wait longer to say it, but I do. I love you, Beatrice. I love you too," she whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." He lowered his head and kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Beatrice's first real kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed it could be. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. They spent that night in the new house, sleeping on blankets spread on the floor, but it felt more luxurious than the finest hotel. They lay side by side, holding hands, talking about their future. Garrett told her about the improvements he wanted to make to the property, about rebuilding the barn and getting livestock again, about maybe starting a carpentry business in Utica now that he had a reason to settle down. Beatrice talked about her garden, about wanting children someday, about the life they would build together. "We should get married soon," Garrett said. "I do not want to wait." "How soon?" Beatrice asked. "Next week if the preacher is available." "Is that too fast?" she laughed. "After proposing 3 weeks after we met." "No, I think next week is perfectly reasonable." They were married the following Saturday in the little church in Utica, with half the town in attendance. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that some of the local children had gathered that morning. Garrett wore a new shirt he had purchased for the occasion, and looked so handsome that Beatrice's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the front of the church. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Garrett kissed her, the whole church erupted in cheers. Afterward, there was a celebration at the boarding house with food and music and dancing. Garrett, who claimed he was not much of a dancer, swept Beatrice around the floor anyway, holding her close and smiling down at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Happy, Mrs. Davis?" he asked as they swayed to the music. Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Davis, she replied. They left the celebration as the sun was setting, riding back to their homestead in the wagon. When they arrived, Garrett helped Beatrice down and then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "Garrett, what are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said, grinning. "It is tradition, is it not?" She laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her into their house, into their home. He set her down gently in the middle of the main room, and they stood there for a moment, just looking at each other in the lamplight. "This is our beginning," Beatrice said softly. "Our beginning," Garrett agreed, pulling her close. "And I intend to make every day of it count." That night, they consummated their marriage in the bed that Garrett had built, and that they had furnished with blankets and pillows purchased in town. It was tender and awkward and wonderful, full of whispered endearments and gentle touches, and the joy of two people discovering each other. Afterward they lay tangled together, Beatrice's head on Garrett's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady under her ear. "I wish my parents could have met you," she said quietly. "They would have loved you." Garrett stroked her hair. "I wish I could have met them too. But I like to think they would be happy that you are not alone anymore, that someone is here to take care of you." "We take care of each other," Beatrice corrected. "That is what marriage is it not?" "Yes," he agreed. "Yes, it is." The next few months were a blur of hard work and happiness. Garrett finished the job for the hardware merchant in town, which gave them some much-needed income. He also started taking on other carpentry projects, building furniture and doing repairs for people in Utica and the surrounding area. His reputation as a skilled craftsman spread quickly, and soon he had more work than he could handle. Meanwhile, Beatrice threw herself into making their homestead productive again. She planted a large garden, purchased some chickens and a milk cow with money they saved, and even managed to track down and reclaim some of the cattle that had scattered during the fire. It was hard work, but she loved it, loved building this life with Garrett, loved falling into bed exhausted at the end of each day knowing he would be there beside her. Cole Hendricks tried one more time to cause trouble, showing up at their property with papers that he claimed proved his ownership of part of their land. But Garrett and Beatrice had been prepared. They went to the county seat with Sheriff Morton and presented their properly filed deed along with the survey the sheriff had done. The county clerk ruled in their favor decisively, and Hendricks was warned that any further harassment would result in legal action against him. After that, they did not hear from him again. Word around town was that he had run into financial troubles and was going to have to sell his ranch anyway. As autumn arrived, painting the Montana landscape in golds and reds, Beatrice realized her monthly courses were late. At first she said nothing, not wanting to get her hopes up, but when another week passed with no sign of them, she confided in Mrs. Henderson during a trip to town. Mrs. Henderson's face lit up. "Oh, my dear, how wonderful. Have you told Garrett yet?" "No, I wanted to be sure first." "But I think I am. I feel different somehow." "You should tell him," Mrs. Henderson urged. "Men like to know these things, and he will be thrilled." That evening, after supper, Beatrice took Garrett's hand and led him outside to sit on the porch he had built. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across their land, and the air was crisp with the promise of coming winter. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart pounding. Garrett looked at her, concern flickering across his face. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong." "Everything is right, so very right." She took a deep breath. "Garrett, I think I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression stunned. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until he was grinning like she had never seen before. "A baby, truly, truly," she said, laughing at his reaction. Or at least I am fairly certain it is still early yet." Garrett let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Beatrice said, cupping his face in her hands. "Our child will be so lucky to have you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and when they finally broke apart, he kept his arms around her, holding her close. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly. "A home, a wife, a child on the way. I spent so many years just drifting, thinking that was all there was for me. And then I met you and everything changed." "You changed my life too," Beatrice said. "You gave me back hope when I thought I had lost everything. You gave me love when I thought I would be alone forever." They sat on the porch until the stars came out, talking about the future, about names for the baby, about the cradle Garrett would build and the little clothes Beatrice would sew. It was the happiest Beatrice had been since before her father died, and she sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the fire that had brought Garrett into her life. Winter came early that year, with the first snows arriving in late October. Garrett had prepared well, though, making sure their house was properly insulated and that they had plenty of firewood stacked and supplies laid in. The homestead looked different now than it had when Beatrice's parents had owned it. The new house was smaller but sturdier, with a fresh coat of whitewash that gleamed in the winter sun. Garrett had built a new barn, modest but functional, and a chicken coop that kept the hens warm and safe. There was a woodshed, a root cellar, and a smokehouse for preserving meat. As Beatrice's pregnancy progressed, Garrett became even more protective, insisting she rest more and let him handle the heavier chores. She protested at first, but as her belly grew and she tired more easily, she had to admit he was right. She spent more time indoors, sewing baby clothes and blankets, knitting tiny socks and caps, preparing for the arrival of their child. Mrs. Henderson came out to visit regularly, bringing advice and encouragement. "You are doing wonderfully, dear," she would say, examining Beatrice with the practiced eye of a woman who had borne 4 children of her own. "The baby is strong and healthy, I can tell." Christmas came, and Garrett surprised Beatrice by bringing home a small pine tree that he set up in the corner of the main room. They decorated it with strings of popcorn and small ornaments carved from wood. Garrett had also secretly been working on a present for Beatrice, a beautiful rocking chair made from cherry wood with smooth, curved armrests and a high back. "For you and the baby," he said when he presented it to her on Christmas morning, "so you can rock our little one to sleep." Beatrice burst into tears, overwhelmed by the love and care he had put into the chair. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she sobbed. "Thank you, Garrett. Thank you for everything." He held her while she cried, then settled her into the chair, rocking her gently. "You have given me everything, Beatrice. This is the least I can do." For his present, she had sewn him a heavy winter coat lined with sheepskin, using fabric she had purchased secretly during trips to town. When he tried it on and found that it fit perfectly, his eyes got misty too. "We are a pair, are we not?" he said, laughing. "Both crying on Christmas." "Happy tears," Beatrice said. "Only happy tears." Winter deepened, and Utica was buried under heavy snows. Garrett made sure to check on their livestock daily, breaking ice on water troughs and making sure the animals had enough feed. Beatrice worried about him being out in the cold, but he always came back safely, stamping snow off his boots and bringing cold air in with him that made her shiver. She would have hot coffee waiting for him, and he would warm his hands around the cup and tell her about what he had seen. Deer tracks in the snow, a frozen creek that would be perfect for ice skating once the baby was born and she was recovered, ideas for improvements they could make to the property come spring. In late February, when the snow was starting to melt and the first hints of spring were in the air, Beatrice went into labor. It started in the middle of the night, a cramping pain that woke her from sleep. She knew immediately what it was, and she gently shook Garrett awake. "It is time," she said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Garrett was awake and alert instantly. "I will ride to town and fetch Mrs. Henderson. She said she would come when you needed her." "Go quickly," Beatrice said, gritting her teeth through another contraction. Garrett dressed in record time and was out the door, and Beatrice heard the thunder of hoofbeats as he galloped away into the darkness. She tried to stay calm, breathing through the pains as they came, lighting lamps and preparing the bed the way Mrs. Henderson had instructed her. It felt like an eternity before she heard horses approaching again, but it was probably only about an hour. Mrs. Henderson bustled in with her bag of supplies, her husband waiting outside with Garrett. "All right, dear. Let us see how you are doing," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice calm and capable. The labor was long and difficult. Beatrice had heard women talk about childbirth, but nothing had truly prepared her for the reality of it. The pain was incredible, rolling over her in waves that left her gasping and crying out. Mrs. Henderson stayed with her through it all, offering encouragement and instruction, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, telling her she was doing wonderfully. Outside, Garrett paced like a caged animal. Mr. Henderson tried to engage him in conversation, but Garrett could barely respond, his entire focus on the sounds coming from inside the house, his heart twisting every time he heard Beatrice cry out in pain. "She will be fine," Mr. Henderson said. "Martha has helped deliver dozens of babies, and your wife is young and strong." "I feel so useless," Garrett said roughly. "She is in there suffering, and there is nothing I can do to help her." "You can be strong for her," Mr. Henderson said. "That is what she needs from you now." Dawn was breaking when they finally heard a different sound, the thin, wailing cry of a newborn baby. Garrett's head jerked up and he stared at the door, hardly daring to breathe. A few minutes later, Mrs. Henderson opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "You can come in now, Mr. Davis. You have a son." Garrett practically ran into the house. Beatrice was propped up in their bed, looking exhausted but radiant, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. He approached slowly, almost reverently, his eyes fixed on that small face. "He is perfect," Beatrice whispered. "Look, Garrett, we have a son." Garrett sat on the edge of the bed and gently pulled back the blanket to see the baby's face. His son had a shock of dark hair and a tiny, red, scrunched-up face. As Garrett watched, the baby opened his eyes, revealing dark blue eyes that seemed to look right at him. "Hello, little one," Garrett said, his voice breaking. "I am your father." He reached out one finger, and the baby's tiny hand closed around it with surprising strength. Garrett felt something crack open in his chest, a well of love so deep and overwhelming that it took his breath away. "He is perfect," Garrett managed to say. "Beatrice, he is absolutely perfect." "Do you want to hold him?" Beatrice asked. Garrett nodded, not trusting his voice. She showed him how to support the baby's head and then carefully transferred the small weight into his arms. Garrett held his son for the first time, looking down at that tiny face, and felt his whole world shift and realign around this new, precious life. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked softly. They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Garrett suddenly knew. "James," he said. "After my father, James Davis, if that is all right with you." "James," Beatrice repeated, smiling. "I love it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, little one." Mrs. Henderson stayed for a few days to help Beatrice recover and to make sure both mother and baby were healthy. Garrett barely left their side, helping with whatever needed to be done, staring at his son with an expression of wonder on his face. He built the cradle he had promised, working late into the night to finish it, and Beatrice would wake to find him standing beside it, watching James sleep, one hand resting protectively on the baby's small chest. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Beatrice told him, and she meant it with all her heart. As spring arrived in full force, bringing green grass and wildflowers and warm sunshine, their little family settled into a new routine. Garrett continued his carpentry work, but arranged his schedule so he was never away from home for more than a few hours at a time. Beatrice tended the house and garden with James strapped to her back in a sling Garrett had fashioned, or sleeping in the cradle that Garrett moved wherever she was working. They had visitors from town regularly, people wanting to meet the new baby and bring gifts. The community had fully accepted Garrett as one of their own now, and there was talk of him running for town council in the next election. He demurred, saying he was too new to Utica, but people insisted he had proved himself and earned their trust. On a warm day in May, almost exactly a year after Garrett had first ridden up to Beatrice's burning homestead, they took James out to the small family cemetery on the edge of their property where Beatrice's parents were buried. Beatrice had brought wildflowers to place on the graves, and she stood there for a long time, holding James and telling her parents about her husband and their grandson. "I wish you could have met him," she said softly. "I wish you could have known Garrett and held James. But I like to think you know somehow that you are watching over us." Garrett put his arm around her shoulders, and together they stood in the peaceful silence, honoring the past while embracing the future they were building together. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with James sleeping in Beatrice's arms, she turned to Garrett with a contented smile. "You remember what you said to me that first morning, when you asked if I wanted your help? I said I could give you a roof over your head and 4 walls to keep out the weather," Garrett recalled. "You gave me so much more than that," Beatrice said. "You gave me hope and love and a family. You gave me a future I never dared to dream of." Garrett took her free hand and brought it to his lips. "We gave those things to each other. That morning I was a man with no ties, no roots, just drifting from place to place. You gave me a reason to stop drifting. You gave me a home." "This is home," Beatrice agreed, looking out over their land at the house they had built together, at the gardens and outbuildings and the life they had created. "For all of us." James stirred and made a small sound, and they both looked down at him with the bottomless love that only parents can understand. Whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, this small family forged from fire and built with lumber and nails and love. As the years passed, their family grew. Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah 2 years after James was born, and another son they called Thomas 2 years after that. The homestead prospered as well. Garrett expanded the house, adding a second floor with bedrooms for the children. He built a larger barn and workshop, and his carpentry business became one of the most successful in the county. People came from miles around to commission furniture and buildings from Garrett Davis, knowing they would get quality craftsmanship and fair dealing. Beatrice's garden became legendary in Utica, producing more vegetables than they could eat, which she sold at the weekly market. She also kept bees and sold honey, and raised chickens whose eggs were prized for their deep orange yolks. She became known as someone who could nurse sick animals back to health, and neighbors would bring her injured creatures to tend. Their children grew up strong and healthy, running wild over the Montana hills, learning to ride horses almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were old enough. James had his father's serious temperament and his mother's determination, and by the time he was 10, He could handle carpentry tools as well as many grown men. Sarah was quieter, with a love for books and learning that had Garrett building her a special shelf for her growing collection. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with such charm and good humor that it was hard to stay angry at him. Garrett and Beatrice's love only deepened with time. They had their disagreements, of course, the small conflicts that arise from two people building a life together. But they had learned to talk through problems, to listen to each other, to remember that they were on the same team. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Garrett took Beatrice into town for a rare dinner at the boarding house restaurant, and afterward they walked through the quiet streets of Utica holding hands like sweethearts. "Would you do it all again?" Garrett asked her. "If you could go back to that night of the fire, knowing everything that was going to happen, would you do it the same way?" Beatrice did not even have to think about her answer. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. That fire was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it brought you into my life. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Garrett stopped walking and pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of the street, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness of their first kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you, Beatrice Davis," he said. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "I love you too," she replied. "Always and forever." Cole Hendricks eventually lost his ranch to the bank and moved away from Montana entirely, bitter and angry but no longer their problem. The community of Utica continued to grow and prosper, and Garrett and Beatrice were respected members of it, known for their hard work, their generosity to neighbors in need, and their obvious devotion to each other and their children. When James was 15, he started courting the daughter of the blacksmith, a sweet girl named Anna who made him blush and stammer. Garrett and Beatrice watched their eldest son navigate the confusions of first love with amusement and tenderness, remembering their own courtship. "Do you think they will marry?" Beatrice asked Garrett one evening as they watched James walk Anna home from church. "Probably," Garrett said. "They look at each other the same way we do. Is he too young? He is only 15. "We will make sure they wait a few years," Garrett said. "But I do not see any harm in them courting, as long as they are chaperoned and proper about it." Sarah, at 13, declared that she had no interest in boys whatsoever and wanted to be a teacher. Beatrice encouraged this dream, working with the local school teacher to make sure Sarah got the best education possible. Thomas, at 11, was still more interested in exploring and causing minor havoc than in any particular future plans. But he had his father's skill with his hands and his mother's way with animals, so his parents figured he would find his path eventually. On a warm summer evening, when James was 17 and helping his father build a new addition onto the church, Sarah was studying to take the teaching examination, and Thomas was training a young horse he had bought with his own saved money. Beatrice and Garrett sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. "We have built a good life," Beatrice said, her hand in Garrett's. "A very good life." "We have," Garrett agreed. "And it all started with a fire and a wagon full of lumber. And a cowboy who stopped to help," Beatrice added, smiling at him. "I was just a carpenter," Garrett protested mildly. "You were my cowboy," Beatrice said. "You rode in when I needed you most, and you stayed. That makes you my cowboy, my hero, my everything." Garrett pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, both of them content in the silence that only comes from years of knowing and loving each other completely. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. James did indeed marry Anna when he turned 20, and they moved into a small house on the edge of the Homestead property that Garrett helped them build. Within a year, They made Garrett and Beatrice grandparents with the birth of a daughter they named Beatrice after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake, Beatrice was overwhelmed with emotion, marveling at the cycle of life and love that continued generation after generation. Sarah passed her teaching examination with flying colors and took a position at the Utica school, becoming beloved by her students for her patience and creativity. She eventually married a lawyer from Helena who came to Utica on business and fell head over heels for the beautiful, intelligent young teacher. They settled in Utica, building a house in town, and gave Garrett and Beatrice 2 more grandchildren. Thomas, true to his wild nature, spent a few years working on various ranches around Montana, learning the cattle business from the ground up. He eventually came back to Utica and started his own small ranch on land adjacent to the family homestead, specializing in breeding quality horses. He married a spirited red-headed woman named Claire who could ride as well as any man and was not afraid of hard work. They had 4 children in rapid succession, all boys, who ran wild over both homesteads and kept everyone on their toes. Through it all, Garrett and Beatrice remained the center of their growing family. Their house was where everyone gathered for Sunday dinners and holidays, where grandchildren came to hear stories of the old days, where problems were solved and celebrations were held. They were elders now, respected in the community, their hair gray and their faces lined with age, but their love for each other had never wavered. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a huge party. The whole town seemed to turn out, and there was music and dancing and more food than could possibly be eaten. Garrett, who still claimed he was not much of a dancer, swept Beatrice around the floor just as he had at their wedding, holding her close and smiling down at her. "Happy, Mrs. Davis?" he asked, just as he had all those years ago. "Happier than words can say, Mr. Davis," she replied, the same answer but with 25 years of love and life behind it now. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was finally quiet, they sat on their porch under the stars. Beatrice leaned against Garrett's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, both of them tired but content. "Do you ever think about that night?" Beatrice asked. "The night of the fire." "Sometimes," Garrett admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if I had ridden past instead of stopping, if I had decided to go straight to town instead of checking on the smoke I saw in the distance." "I think about it too," Beatrice said, "about how I thought I had lost everything, that my life was over. I could not imagine how I would go on." "But you did go on," Garrett said. "You were so strong, Beatrice. Even that first morning, covered in ashes and tears, you had steel in your spine. That is what I fell in love with first, I think. Your strength." "I fell in love with your kindness," Beatrice said, "and your steadiness. The way you just decided to help me and then did it, no questions asked, no expectations. You gave me everything and asked for nothing in return." "I got everything in return," Garrett said softly. "I got you, and our children and our grandchildren, and this life we built together. I got a home and a purpose and love that fills every corner of my days. That fire took everything from you, but it gave me everything I never knew I needed." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the Montana night. Crickets singing, a distant coyote howl, the soft rustle of wind through grass. Inside the house, they could hear the old clock Garrett had built ticking steadily, marking the passage of time. "I am so grateful," Beatrice said finally, "for all of it, the good and the bad, the easy times and the hard ones, because it all led us here to this moment, to this life." "So am I," Garrett said, "so am I." As they aged into their 60s and then 70s, Garrett and Beatrice gradually slowed down, letting their children take over more of the work. James took over the carpentry business, with Thomas helping when he had time between his ranch work. Sarah's eldest son showed an interest in teaching, and she was mentoring him to possibly take over her position at the school when she was ready to retire. Garrett's hands, once so strong and sure with hammer and saw, developed arthritis that made detailed work difficult. But he still spent time in his workshop, now mostly just whittling small toys for his many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Beatrice's garden was smaller now, tended more by daughters-in-law and granddaughters than by herself, though she still insisted on planting the first seeds every spring and harvesting the last tomatoes every fall. They moved more slowly, tired more easily, but they were content. They had lived full lives, had seen their family flourish, had contributed to their community in meaningful ways. On warm days, you could find them on their porch, holding hands and watching the world go by, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, always together. When Garrett was 76 and Beatrice was 73, he had a mild heart attack while working in his shop. It frightened them both, a reminder that their time together was finite. The doctor ordered him to rest and take things easy, advice that Garrett found incredibly frustrating. But Beatrice was firm, enlisting their children to make sure he did not overdo things, and gradually he accepted this new, slower pace of life. "I am not ready to leave you yet," he told Beatrice one night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest as it had been for decades. "Good," she said. "Because I am not ready to let you go. We still have years ahead of us, Garrett Davis. Do not you dare leave me." He kissed the top of her head. "I will do my best," and he did. He recovered well from the heart attack, and though he had to be more careful, he was still himself. Still kind, still devoted to his family, still madly in love with his wife. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy of love that stretched across 3 generations. On a clear fall day, when the aspens had turned gold and the air had that crisp quality that promised winter, Garrett and Beatrice took a walk around their property. It was something they did less frequently now, their bodies not quite up to the long walks they had once taken without thinking. But today, Garrett had insisted, saying he wanted to see their land one more time while the colors were so beautiful. They walked slowly, hand in hand, past the house they had built together, past the barn and outbuildings and gardens. They walked to the small family cemetery where Beatrice's parents were buried, along with a few of their own generation who had passed on. Someone, probably one of their daughters-in-law, had placed fresh flowers on the graves. "When my time comes," Garrett said quietly, "I want to be buried here. Next to you when your time comes, on the land we made our own." "That will not be for a long time yet," Beatrice said firmly, but she squeezed his hand. "But yes, here together, always together." They stood for a while in the peaceful cemetery, thinking about life and death and the legacy they would leave behind. Then they turned and walked back toward the house, where they could see smoke rising from the chimney and knew that one of their children had started a fire in the fireplace to warm the house for them. That night, after a family dinner where 3 generations crowded around the expanded table that Garrett had built to accommodate their growing family, after the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren had all gone home, Beatrice and Garrett settled into their bedroom. The fire in the fireplace crackled cheerfully, and outside the window they could see stars scattered across the vast Montana sky. "It has been a good life," Garrett said, pulling Beatrice close as they lay in bed. "The best life," she agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible back when I was a lonely girl watching my home burn down." "You are never going to stay lonely," Garrett said. "You are too special, too too strong, too loving. Someone would have come along eventually. But I am glad it was you, Beatrice said. I am so glad it was you, Garrett. You were always the one I was meant to find. We found each other, Garrett corrected gently, and I have been grateful for that every single day since. They fell asleep like that, in each other's arms as they had for over 35 years. And when morning came, they woke together to another day, another chance to love each other, another blessing in the life they had built from ashes and lumber and nails and hope. Garrett lived to be 82, finally passing peacefully in his sleep one winter night with Beatrice holding his hand. She felt his hand relax in hers, felt the moment his spirit left, and though her heart broke, she also felt peace. He had lived a long, full life, had been surrounded by love until the very end, had known without question how deeply he was cherished. His funeral was the largest Utica had ever seen. People came from all over Montana, former clients and friends, people whose lives he had touched in small and large ways. All of his children were there, all of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The church could not hold everyone, and people spilled out into the street, all of them there to honor a man who had been truly good, truly kind, truly faithful to his family and community. Beatrice stood at the graveside with her children around her, watching as they lowered her husband into the ground on the property they had made their own. She held James's arm for support, her tears flowing freely, but her voice was strong when she spoke. He gave me everything, she said to the assembled crowd. He rode into my life when I had nothing, and he gave me a home, a family, a future. He was the best man I have ever known, and I will love him until the day I die and beyond. After the funeral, Beatrice moved into town to live with Sarah and her family. The homestead went to James as the eldest, though it was understood that it belonged to all the siblings equally. Beatrice visited often, walking through the rooms of the house where she had spent the happiest years of her life, touching the furniture Garrett had built, standing on the porch where they had spent so many evenings watching the sunset. She lived for 3 more years after Garrett died, years filled with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told stories about the old days, about the fire and the cowboy who had ridden in with lumber and nails, about building a life from nothing but love and determination. She made sure her descendants understood the legacy they had inherited. That family was everything, that love was worth fighting for, that kindness and hard work would always be rewarded. On a spring morning, when the wildflowers were blooming and the air was sweet with the promise of new life, Beatrice passed away in her sleep at Sarah's house. She was 79 years old, and she died with a smile on her face, as if she had seen something beautiful in her dreams. Her children buried her next to Garrett in the family cemetery on the homestead, just as she had requested. They placed a single headstone for both of them, with simple words that said everything that needed to be said. Garrett Davis and Beatrice Davis, beloved husband and wife, they built a life of love from ashes and hope together always years past, and the homestead continued through the generations. James's children took it over from him and their children after that. The town of Utica grew and changed, but the Davis family remained a central part of it, known for their craftsmanship, their integrity, their commitment to community. And on warm summer evenings, if you walked past the old homestead at sunset, sometimes people swore they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch, hands clasped, watching the sun go down over the Montana hills. Just shadows, they would say, or tricks of the light. But those who knew the story, who had heard the tale of the fire and the cowboy and the life built from lumber and nails and love, they knew better. They knew it was Garrett and Beatrice, still together, still in love, still watching over the land and the family they had created. because that kind of love does not end with death. It goes on, woven into the very fabric of the place where it grew, eternal as the Montana sky, enduring as the land itself. And so their love story ended not with an ending at all, but with a continuation, a legacy that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and devotion. They had started with nothing but ashes and determination, and they had built an empire of love that would last forever. The fire had taken everything from Beatrice that terrible night. But from those ashes had risen something far more valuable than any house or possession. A love story for the ages, a family built on solid foundations, a life that mattered. And it all began with a woman watching her world burn, and a cowboy who rode in with lumber and nails, ready to help rebuild not just a house, but a heart, a home, and a future filled with more love than either of them had ever dared to dream possible.